Hello, guys. Eric and Kim here to talk about the small, under the radar indie movie, Spider Man No Way Home. We're going to try to give some attention to this one that it doesn't have. um, Look, you know the drill. Directed by John Watts, again, third in the trilogy, written by Chris McKenna and Eric Summers, who wrote the first two as well. This will be a non spoiler review, which is to say, we will only talk about the things that have been in the trailers. So that's fairly substantial if you've been staying away from all the trailers. I don't know why you'd be watching this. But we won't go into stuff beyond that. Everything been speculated about, everything people are guessing or theorizing, or is this real or not? We're not going to talk about those specifics. But if it's been released officially, it's fair game. Again, you know the basics here, but I'll just say, try to keep it succinct and say, Peter Parker, his identity was revealed at the end of the last movie to the world. This causes huge problems for him, but also for his loved ones, and feeling especially about the guilt about that, about how his people he loves lives are being affected. He goes to Doctor Strange. He says, "Hey, can you make it so no one knows that I am Spider-Man? They forget that I am Spider-Man." Something goes wrong with that spell. It doesn't work out the way it was supposed to. And instead, other beings from other worlds begin to come to, I say ours, to the MCU, to the familiar universe. And these are familiar characters from movies of the past 20 years because they are villains from previous Spider-Man movies that we saw that did not involve Tom Holland. And chaos ensues. A lot of stuff happens here. Look, what'd you say, Kim?
Chaos.
Chaos indeed. This is, of course, the most anticipated movie of the year. There's been so much hype, so much speculation, so much talk about it. Kim, what are your overall thoughts on Spider-Man No Way Home?
My overall thoughts, it was great fun. And to see it in the theater that I saw it in was awesome. It was packed, maybe not the most responsible thing in this day and age, but lively. It was such a crowd pleaser. Everybody was cheering, and I'm not very demonstrative in that way. I'm English, but inside I was doing the same. And my mind is still blown that the MCU has opened its wing and ushered underneath it Sam Raimi and Mark Webb's Spider-Man worlds. And I can't believe mainstream cinema has done this, and it's a whole new world from here on in. It was great seeing the likes of Willem Dafoe's Green Goblin again. What a feat bringing him in, and the others that we know of. I'm not going to mention them all because just in case I slip. Or there's too many to mention. Some of it didn't quite land for me. Some of the humor I felt was a misfire, and I'm not sure about the treatment of Doctor Strange in this film, which we've talked a little bit about in the past. But quite minor gripes for such a huge cinematic milestone.
I think I'm fairly similar to you on this, Kim. Yeah, because you leave this movie feeling like, wow, just what an accomplishment. It played great, press screenings, which are not going to be usually has because I live in LA where people are very demonstrative, very cheering, screaming for, and I think this is going to be a crazy opening night. I'm seeing it the Chinese. I look forward to it. But the press screening, there was some big reactions and stuff and some cheering and some emotional reactions, great moments that just work. And also, like you said, this is an insane movie to even exist, to acknowledge these other movies. A beloved, I say beloved trilogy, realizing the third movie maybe didn't stick the landing, but a beloved accomplishment with the Raimi Maguire Spider-Man movies, and then a much more mixed bag that frankly never fulfilled itself with the Webb Garfield movies, which we never even got a conclusion to, but that it all counts. It all happened officially. It's all now kind of connected to the MCU. Insane. And something as a kid who grew up reading comic books with crazy crossovers, I could never imagine we'd get cool Spider-Man movies, much less one where all this is happening and all these villains are coming in. So that's so cool. I think to me, it's a pretty easy split for me, the movie. And as far as my only real issues with the movie, the first half, I think, is pretty clunky. And that's where I agree with you. the humor doesn't all land. I just rewatched the other Tom Holland Spider-Man movies, and the first half sometimes had me a little nervous because it just wasn't clicking in like those first two did. Like the first two had such a great feel to them, and they were, about this young Spider-Man, and the humor was really, engaging. And this time there's some stuff that works really well and sometimes it doesn't. But to me, the second half movie works so well that in its totality, I think this is a great movie, great fun. First half, yeah, it's clunky. There's some stuff that works, some stuff that doesn't.
Yeah.
What do you think? For you, let's talk a little bit more about Doctor Strange, because I know, that's the same one.
Yeah.
This is the MCU movies. Have kind of each one had this sort of anchor, MCU Spider-Man movies, I should say, anchor to the greater MCU, right? So we had Iron Man in the first one. The second one we had Nick Fury, or did we? But Samuel L. Jackson was there throughout the film. This time, Benedict Cumberbatch as Doctor Strange. Again, something funny I want to point out. It has been 5 years since the one and only Doctor Strange movie. For most franchises would be insane. They've still haven't given us the sequel. It's the MCU, so we've actually seen the character many times since. But what did you think of his use here?
Yeah, he was sidelined for a lot of the movie for a start. But we've seen in the trailers his willingness to perform this spell for Peter Parker, and it does seem kind of out of character. Maybe had we not had the other movies after his original solo movie, I wouldn't feel this way, but he's grown a lot since he first got his powers, and to think that he would perform this, by his own admission, dangerous spell for Peter Parker for this reason is still a big stretch for me. And then there's another moment towards the end of the film which doesn't sit well with me either. So it feels like a plot device to get this thing to happen, and doesn't feel particularly well fitted, well planned out. It doesn't seem to fit for me. And he also gets some awkward comedic lines that made me cringe, particularly as you say in the first half of the movie. So yeah.
I think I was a little more forgiving of him doing the spell, even though I agree with you that the biggest problem is that those Avengers movies happen in between, because I 100% think that the arrogant, fly by the seat of his pants Doctor Strange of the first movie would do this. After everything they've gone through, would he still... it's a little more of a stretch that I could go with, but I do agree it's a little bit like, this maybe we got you on a bad day here, Stephen, because I think you should have maybe you should have sat on this one instead of like Peter walking in, suggesting it, and you being like, all right, let's do it.
Or maybe a good day, because you would need to have an enormous amount of empathy for this boy in order to perform this spell, and I don't see Doctor Strange as ordinarily having that empathy. So
yeah, he's not he cares, but yeah, I agree. It just felt like something it has to happen for the movie to happen. It's a little clunky, maybe. The execution didn't bother me quite as much, but I do agree. Yeah, it's like it's kind of a thing where you have to just kind of go with it, because it's it is what it is.
Which I ultimately did.
Yes, yeah. But let's talk a little bit more about these returning villains, because it's so great. Look, especially I think like the ones that are obviously being the most prominent in the trailers and promotion. They've done sit down interviews together. Is Jamie Foxx as Electro, Alfred Molina has Dr. Octopus, and Willem Dafoe has Green Goblin. So great, like it's funny because of course, Jamie Foxx is coming off of the movie that was not well received. The other two are coming off beloved movies. And I think one of the great joys of this movie is the two of them back. And nothing wrong with what Jamie Foxx is doing. It's just not as exciting because we saw him way more recently and in a movie that we didn't love as much. But to have Dafoe and Molina back, and to have them working together, because that never happened in the Raimi movies, is so fun. And they both, I think, it felt like they were having a ball coming back to this world. What do you think of the two of them and their dynamic?
It did. I feel like in the back of my mind, Alfred Molina has said that he did it for the money. Whether that was a joke or not, I'm not sure. But he definitely seemed to be having a ball. They both did. And I loved seeing them together, and And one of the things for all of the returning villains, they had a bigger, more nuanced and involved role than I had expected. And I really enjoyed them all. Even Jamie Foxx as Electro.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I think that they pay proper respect for the movies they came from, the stories came from. There are definitely some jokes and a couple funny lines about the origins of these characters and kind of the convenience of how some of them become these villains. But at the same time, they're all kind of given a nice little weight to them. And we feel like none of it's discarded. I really enjoyed that a lot. What did you think of this? This is a weird question, I guess, because I think it's impossible to deny the joys of this movie and what it's doing and how huge it is. I will say it's a little disappointing, not disappointing. It's just a little sad, but watching all three of these together, the Tom Holland Spider-Man movies, it's like, man, this is such a shift as a third movie, because except for Ned and MJ, like all of his classmates and his teachers who were integral to the last movie, huge part of it are pushed aside. They're barely here because they can't be. Is it weird to you, just like, if when people go back and watch these Tom Holland Spider-Man movies, that it's like, does this feel like kind of part of that trilogy, or kind of that it's doing its own thing?
I mean, maybe if you don't take note of the other MCU movies that he's been a part of, because they've happened between. But for me, I think it needed to happen. The shift needed to happen because he was maturing quite slowly, and it feels like there's been quite a Peter Parker as a character.
Yeah,
and there's been quite a shift in this film, as well as in terms of the scale of the whole thing, and it fits nicely now, or sets up a lot of what's to come in the MCU. And I think if Peter Parker or Tom Holland is to stick around for more films, more Spider-Man solo movies, this new trilogy that Amy Pascal's talking about, he needs to, as a character, develop, and that's what this film sets up.
Yeah, I guess I'm of both minds about it, because I want to stress, by the way, because I feel some people are like, are you saying you'd rather have more Flash Thompson than Doc Ock and Green Goblin? No. I'd rather have Green Goblin and Doc Ock. But it was funny having just watched No Way Home, which is like, the sort of joyful movie, him and his classmates, that like this huge, like, multiverse shattering thing, all coming together here. But it still works. It's a little weird, but I am curious where it goes going forward. Certainly not going to get specific here at all, but I really like how this movie ends. And you were kind of just mentioning this a little bit. I think it does a really good job of setting the stage for what's next. Tom Holland is being pretty coy right now in interviews, including when you spoke to him about his involvement. My read on this is he's coming back. They just haven't signed every, they haven't dotted every I. He's going to make a lot of money and he'll come back. But I really like, as a fan of the comics and of the character Spider-Man and on some core elements, where this movie ends with the character is very interesting. And I really like that. I feel like you felt the same, but I don't want to speak for you, Kim. What'd you think?
Yeah, I do feel the same. And kind of connected to that, we've talked about the humor and the epic scale of it, and yet there's still this emotional core in this film. There are some really genuine, heartfelt, emotional moments that really tug at the heartstrings. Lots of people you may have seen online saying that they cried. I didn't, because I'm hard as nails. Promise, I swear I didn't cry. Did you cry?
I don't know if I cried, but I got pretty damn emotional. I could have cried. Precipice of crying. Yeah, I think that I look, from the start, Tom Holland's been great casting as Spider-Man, and it has been a great Spider-Man. And I think this movie, as much as it's like huge scale and so many characters, it doesn't lose the plot on being a story about Peter Parker, being a story about Spider-Man, who's a fascinating character because, he's lovable and he's a funny character, but he's also often marked by like having to make sacrifices, having to make hard decisions. He's always this, he can't have it all. I mean, it's sometimes this melodrama, sometimes it's pathos, and I love that about the character. And I think this movie doesn't forget that. And there was a concern, I mean, because this movie could have been a total mess, right? There's a version of this movie where it's like, here's 20 characters and here's the multiverse and here's all this, and you don't feel any connective tissue emotionally. And thankfully, that's not the case. I still felt very connected to Peter and his plight, throughout this.
Absolutely. There was a real fear. I think we talked about it several times, that it was going to be overstuffed nonsense. But John Watts does a great job with balancing it all. And the writers.
Yeah, I think you really have to give credit there, because they have kept it grounded. I know is an overused word, but you just emotional core that really works. Also, I will say, these movies, I've loved the Holland Spider-Man movies. They have not been like the most visually dynamic movies, but I want to sort of say that they do some cool stuff with Doctor Strange here, who of course had one of the most visually dynamic movies. I know they recently, I think a couple days ago, they released a clip. We'd seen a bit in the trailers there's a mirror dimension sequence with Doctor Strange and Spider-Man, and I kind of love that, and that sort of kaleidoscope vision was done really well. And there's a lot of these fun sort of little Spider-Man action beats, but I think at the core you have to care about Peter Parker, and very happy that this movie continued to do that. Overall thoughts here, Kim. This movie is clearly not going to need help, I think, getting people to see it. But I think when people give it a little bit of distance, what do you think in the scheme of things for the MCU and for Spider-Man? What will the thoughts be, and what are your thoughts?
Well, my thoughts, when it was first announced, this film, I was, the Spider-Man films are not my favorite films in the MCU, and I was underwhelmed by the prospect. And as rumors gathered pace and we got closer, it's become one of my most anticipated MCU movies ever, and it didn't disappoint me. It's not a perfect film, but it didn't disappoint, and I think generally its legacy will be that it's a jumping off point for the rest of what comes next in the MCU.
Yeah, I would not say this is one of the very, very best MCU movies. While undeniably it has moments that will have people cheering, it had me cheering, crowd pleasing, wonderful moments. I even looking at the Spider-Man movie, like, first of all, I think Into the Spider-Verse is going to be very hard to ever top as the best movie about the character Spider-Man. And I do think maybe even Homecoming, I would say, is still my favorite of the three movies on a like start to finish, accomplishing all its goals level. Even while I understand why some people will say this is their favorite, simply because sometimes you have to give credit for giving people really cool stuff they wanted to see and get to cheer for. And doing it well, because again, as we mentioned, there's the terrible version of this. There's a version where it's like, hey, here's everything you've ever loved, and it's just nonsense. And this is so thankfully not that. I do think looking back, I won't hold this as like the very, very best of the MCU. But I think it'll still be one that'll be really fun to revisit, and sort of get that endorphin rush off of, especially in the second half. It's a little work to get there overall, but it definitely sticks the landing here. What would you give it out of 5 stars, Kim?
I am going to give it 4 stars because it's such a landmark movie. It does so much stuff so well, and I was scared it wouldn't, but it is not perfect.
I am also going to give it 4 stars. That's exactly how I feel. I mean, I don't feel hesitation saying this is a great movie and a super fun movie, and people should see it. It's not a perfect movie, and it's not a perfect MCU movie, but man, when it delivers big time. So 4 out of 5 for me as well. All right, guys, we will have plenty more. We're going to do a spoiler chat on Spider-Man No Way Home. We know everyone's going to have thoughts. We want to hear them. So we'll be so look for that. And we'll have plenty more for you here at Fandom. Thanks, guys.